Hey, my name is Connor Walker. I'm 35 years old and I live alone on a small ranch about 20 minutes outside the nearest town in Montana. It's not one of those big spreads you see in movies, just a few hundred acres of dry pasture, a modest herd of cattle, some goats, a chicken coop, an old barn, and a Ford pickup that's already pushed past 200,000 miles. I'm not rich. I'm not even what most people around here would call a real rancher. I'm just a man who gets up before dawn, fixes fences, feeds the animals, and does whatever it takes to keep the place from falling apart. 3 years ago, my wife Maria died in a flash flood. A calf got caught near the creek behind the barn during a bad storm. I was in town buying vet medicine. She went out alone to save it. By the time I got back, the water had already taken her. Since then, the days have been quiet. I still work. I still pay the bills. I still keep the ranch running. But most of the time, it feels like I'm just moving through the motions inside a house that stopped being a home the night she didn't come back. That October night, the rain was coming down hard. Wind kept slamming the barn door against the frame. I had just finished checking the cattle and was heading inside to make coffee when I heard the knocking. It wasn't a normal knock. It was weak, fast, almost desperate. I opened the door and found a girl standing on the porch. She looked about 25. Dark hair plastered to her face, thin jacket soaked through, jeans caked in mud up to the knees. She carried a small backpack in one hand and a plastic folder of papers in the other. She was shaking from the cold, but it was her eyes that stopped me. They weren't just scared of the rain or the dark. They were the eyes of someone who had been running for a long time and wasn't sure the door in front of her would actually open. She looked at me, lips trembling. "Are you Connor Walker?" I frowned. "Yeah, who are you?" She swallowed hard, voice barely above the sound of the rain. "They sent me here, to be your wife." I stood there for a few seconds, thinking I must have misheard. "What did you say?" She repeated it, clearer this time, but still shaking. "They said you signed the agreement, that you needed a wife for the ranch, that I had to come." I looked her over, half confused and half on guard. I hadn't signed up for any mail-order bride service. I hadn't been looking for a wife at all since Maria. Yet here was a complete stranger standing on my porch in the middle of a storm, claiming someone had sent her to marry me. I spoke slowly. "There's been some kind of mistake. I didn't sign any agreement." She took one small step forward, real fear in her face. "Please don't send me back. I can't go back there. If I go back, he'll destroy me." The way she said it made me stop asking questions. I glanced past her at the dark dirt road. No car, no one else with her, just rain, mud, and wind. "How did you get here?" I hitched a ride on a truck to the gas station off the highway, then I walked. From the gas station to my place was at least 8 miles. In the rain. At night. In shoes that were already falling apart. I noticed the bruises on her wrists. The faint purple mark just below her collarbone that her jacket didn't quite cover. Anger stirred in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "Come inside, you can't stand out there." She stepped through the door fast like she was afraid I might change my mind. I closed it behind her and locked it. The house is small, an old ranch-style place with the living room running straight into the kitchen, a wood stove in the corner, a table, 2 chairs, 1 main bedroom, and a storage room I use for tools. Since Maria died, nothing much has changed. Her rocking chair still sits by the window with an old wool blanket draped over it. The girl stood near the stove, arms wrapped around herself. "My name is Elena Mendoza," she said. "I'm sorry for showing up like this." I grabbed a clean towel and handed her an old flannel shirt of mine. "Take off that wet jacket. Bathroom's at the end of the hall. Then you can tell me what's going on." 10 minutes later, she came back wearing my flannel over a thin t-shirt. Her hair was still damp, but her face looked a little less pale. I made her a cup of hot tea and set it on the table. She held the mug with both hands like it was the only warm thing left in the world. I asked, "Who sent you here?" She looked down at the plastic folder. "Richard Salazar." I knew the name. Everyone in the area did. Richard Salazar owned the big feed and supply store, the trucking company, and half the land deals that went through the county. He was rich, connected to the bank, and had fingers in almost everything that kept small ranches like mine running. I didn't like him, but I still bought feed and parts from his store because there weren't many other options. I said, I buy supplies from his store. That's it. I don't have any other dealings with Richard Salazar. Elena opened the folder and pulled out a neatly printed contract. My name was on it. My ranch address was on it. Even a signature that looked exactly like mine. She placed the paper in front of me. He said you paid for me to come here. He said my family owed him, and I was the way to pay it back. A cold feeling moved through me. I picked up the document. It was printed on thick paper with a fake company logo at the top. Agricultural Partner Services, or something just as official sounding. It stated that I, Connor Walker, agreed to accept Elena Mendoza as a live-in partner in ranch support in exchange for a $50,000 payment already placed in escrow. At the bottom was my signature, except I had never signed it, and I had never had $50,000 to begin with. I set the paper down, anger rising, but trying not to let it show on my face. The signature was good. Too good. Someone had copied it from old invoices or delivery receipts I'd signed over the years. The wording was careful. It never said anything about buying a person. It just made her sound like a domestic and labor partner under a civil agreement. I tapped the paper. I never signed this. Elena closed her eyes like she had been waiting for someone to confirm what she already suspected. Then she told me the rest. Her father had owned a small vineyard and family winery in Oregon. After he died in a suspicious truck accident, Elena discovered the family owed Salazar a large sum. The loan papers had her father's signature, but she believed they were forged. Salazar took the land, forced the sale of assets, froze accounts, and bought off the local lawyer. When Elena fought back, he threatened her. He wanted her as his mistress. When she refused, he told her she had nothing left but herself, and then arranged to send her to me as punishment. I asked, why me? She shook her head. I don't know. Maybe because you live alone. Maybe because you don't have much voice in the county. Maybe he wanted to use you as a pawn. If you accept me, he has paperwork saying I came willingly. If you refuse, I have nowhere else to go. Either way, he wins. I looked at the girl sitting across from me. She was exhausted, cold, scared, but her back was still straight. I had thought the world had taken every last bit of caring out of me after Maria died. But that night, watching someone else get pushed to the edge, I knew I couldn't turn away. I said, "You're staying here tonight. I'll sleep on the couch. Tomorrow morning we'll figure out what comes next." Elena stared at me like she couldn't believe it. "You believe me? I believe the bruises on your wrists. I believe the way you shake when you say his name. And I know my own signature." She started to cry then, very quietly, like she was trying not to disturb anyone with her pain. "Thank you, Connor." I didn't answer right away. Outside, the rain kept hitting the roof. Inside me, something had shifted. From the moment I opened that door, my quiet life was over. And strangely, I didn't mind. I barely slept that night. Elena took the bedroom. I stayed on the couch staring at the ceiling while the rain finally eased off. The fake contract sat on the kitchen table like something that could explode if I looked at it too long. I kept thinking about Salazar, how he knew my address, my buying habits, even that I lived alone. I had always thought I was invisible in this county. Turned out someone had been watching me long enough to turn me into a piece on his board. Morning came gray and quiet. When Elena stepped out of the bedroom wearing one of Maria's old work shirts and a pair of jeans cuffed at the ankles, I was already cracking eggs into a skillet. The clothes were too big on her, but at least she wasn't shivering anymore. She stood in the kitchen doorway, awkward. "Let me help." I shook my head. "You walked 8 miles in the rain last night. Sit down." She stayed where she was, looking like she didn't know how to accept someone taking care of her. "I don't want to be a burden." I glanced over my shoulder. "On a ranch, everybody works, but nobody has to prove their worth 5 minutes after they've run from hell." She was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a chair. Breakfast was nothing special. Eggs, toast, butter, coffee, and the last of some strawberry jam. Elena ate slowly, but it was clear she was starving. Even in that situation, she still had manners. She held the mug with both hands. She said thank you after every small thing. I noticed her hands were soft, nails once cared for but now broken and dirty. She looked like someone who had lived better once, but her eyes belonged to a person who had been hit hard enough to stop believing in safety. After we ate, I opened my old laptop and scanned the contract, then called Grace Miller. Grace was a small-town lawyer who had helped me sort out the insurance and ownership papers after Maria died. She was the only person in the county I trusted with anything legal. I sent her the file. An hour later, she called back. Yes. Her voice was serious. Connor, the signature looks like yours, but there are too many red flags. The contract itself is written in a very slippery way. It's not strong enough to force you to keep her, but it's enough for Salazar to cause trouble if he wants to smear your name or file a civil claim. Can we go to the police? You could, but you know who the sheriff is friendly with. If you want to make this big, you'll need stronger evidence. Proof he forged documents, coerced her, and that it ties back to her family's property. I looked across the table at Elena. She sat perfectly still, listening to every word, her face going pale. Grace added, keep her safe. Don't sign anything. Don't let Salazar take her anywhere. And Connor, be careful. Men like Richard Salazar don't like being told no. That afternoon, a black SUV came down the dirt road. I was outside fixing the windbreak on the cattle pen. Elena stayed inside, watching through the curtains. The SUV stopped in front of the house. Richard Salazar got out. In person, he looked even more unpleasant than I remembered. Early 50s, expensive jacket, shoes too clean for mud country, silver hair slicked back. He always wore the same polite half-smile, like he was calculating the value of everything in front of him. A younger man stayed in the driver's seat. Salazar walked over. I wiped my hands on my jeans and stepped between him and the house. Connor Walker, finally get to talk face to face. I kept my voice flat. What do you want? He smiled. Just checking that Miss Mendoza arrived safely. I hope you're pleased with the arrangement. I looked him straight in the eye. I didn't sign any agreement. I didn't pay you any money, and Elena is not for sale. The smile stayed, but his eyes went cold. You should be careful with your words, Connor. I have paperwork. I have witnesses. You're just a small rancher living alone with a few cows and some bank debt. I took one step closer. You forged my signature. That's a serious accusation. And you threatened her. Salazar tilted his head toward the window where Elena was watching. She's very good at telling stories. Just like her father. Always thinks she's the victim. My hands tightened at my sides. Get off my land. He gave a short laugh. You really want to make me an enemy? I'm not making you anything. You're doing that yourself. Salazar moved closer and lowered his voice. You buy feed from my store. You have a loan through a bank where I have influence. You sell cattle through a hauler that works with me. You think you're independent, but you're not, Connor. A small place like this can die very quickly if a few doors close. I answered, then close them. For the first time, the smile disappeared. He turned back to the SUV, but before he got in, he said, She's going to bring trouble to your door. When this ranch starts falling apart, remember who opened it for her. The SUV drove away, leaving fresh tire tracks in the mud. Elena came running out onto the porch. You shouldn't have done that. He'll retaliate. I turned to look at her. Maybe, but I'm not handing you over to him. She studied my face for a long moment. Why? I didn't have a clean answer ready. Because it was the right thing? Because Maria would have been ashamed if I turned my back? Because for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could stand up for someone? In the end, I just said, because nobody deserves to be treated like property. That night, the retaliation started. The next morning when I went out to check the chickens, the coop door was wide open. More than half the flock had scattered across the yard. The hinges had been unscrewed with tools, not blown open by wind. Elena and I spent the whole morning chasing them down. She slipped in the mud more than once but kept getting up, hair messy, face flushed, arms full of a squawking hen. I couldn't help laughing. She glared at me. It's not funny. Sorry, that one just looked like it was winning. She looked at the hen in her arms, then started laughing too. The sound carried across the muddy yard, clear and sudden. It had been a long time since the ranch had heard anything like that. By afternoon, the good feeling was gone. The east fence had been cut. 2 cows had wandered onto the neighbor's pasture. I found fresh ATV tracks near the break. Nobody had been caught. Nobody had broken into the house. But the message was clear. Salazar didn't need to drag Elena away in daylight. He could just break the ranch piece by piece, fence by fence, animal by animal, until I gave up on my own. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table eating canned soup and toast. Elena put her spoon down. I should leave. I set my spoon down too. No. If I stay, he'll destroy everything you have. I can fix fences, I can round up chickens, I can find new suppliers, but if you go back to him, you won't be able to fix yourself. She lowered her head. Tears hit the backs of her hands. I don't want you to lose the ranch because of me. I looked around the old kitchen, the walls Maria had painted, the table I had built myself, the scratches on the floorboards. This place was just something I survived in every day. If it has to take a few hits to become the reason someone else gets to live, then at least it means something. Elena didn't answer, but for the first time, she didn't bring up leaving again. The days after Salazar's visit were quiet on the surface, but tense underneath. He didn't show up again, but his presence was everywhere. The feed store suddenly had account issues and refused to sell me anything. The hauler I usually use said he was booked for the next 2 months. A parts order for the tractor got canceled at the last minute. One night, the security camera I had pointed at the fuel tank caught a hooded figure walking around the barn, but the license plate on the truck was covered in mud. I started changing how I did things. I drove an extra 40 minutes to buy feed in the next county. I put up motion sensor lights around the barn and the house. I borrowed 2 old cameras from Mr. Coleman, the retired firefighter who lived on the next property over. Grace had warned me that men like Salazar didn't just break fences, they could break records too. So I moved the important papers onto a cloud drive. Elena changed too. At first, she didn't know the difference between good hay and hay that had gone moldy. She didn't know how to work the latch on the cattle gate or how to drive the old truck on the dirt roads without spinning the wheels. But she learned fast. I showed her how to mix feed, how to check the water troughs, how to spot a goat that wasn't feeling right, how to splice a broken fence with pliers and wire. The first time she tried milking one of the goats, the animal kicked the bucket over and soaked her from the waist down. I laughed. She got mad. Then we both ended up laughing so hard we forgot for a minute that someone was trying to run us off the land. She said, I never thought I'd be happy about getting half a bucket of milk. I answered, out here, half a bucket is a pretty big win. Elena looked at me and something in her eyes softened. So, I'm getting better? Much better. From that morning on, she started getting up with me before dawn. She made coffee while I checked the weather on my phone. She wrote the day's tasks on the whiteboard by the fridge. In the evenings, she used my laptop to dig into records, her father's old loans, the companies connected to Salazar, property transfers. She had studied business management before everything fell apart, and she was good with paperwork. Where I only saw confusing fine print, she saw patterns, gaps, and lies. One night we were sitting at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere when she found something strange. In the land transfer records from her family's property, there was a shell company called Northline Holdings. It had bought the land at a very low price, right after her father died. And Northline had ties to a small investment fund that had given me a loan 2 years earlier to repair the barn. I stared at the screen, a cold feeling running down my back. So he didn't pick me by accident. Elena nodded. He knew you had some debt. He knew your ranch was the kind that could be squeezed. Maybe he planned to use the fake contract to control both of us. If you signed anything else, he could use it as leverage to force you to sell. I sat there in silence. This land wasn't much, but it was everything I had left. Maria was buried on the hill behind the apple trees. My father had fixed the barn roof. My mother had planted wildflowers along the driveway. If Salazar wanted the ranch, then Elena was only part of a bigger plan. At the same time, the sabotage got worse. One morning, I found the water pump system for the cattle troughs had its wires cut clean with pliers. If I hadn't caught it early, the herd could have gone without water all day. Another time, someone tipped over a barrel of diesel in the barn. We were lucky it didn't catch fire, but the smell stayed in the wood for days. It was getting closer. Elena blamed herself again. This is happening because I came here. I was on my back under the pump housing, hands covered in oil. I looked up at her. No, this is happening because Salazar is greedy. But if you hadn't shown up, he still would have found a way to take this place. You just made me see it sooner. She went quiet, then crouched down and handed me the roll of electrical tape. That night she asked about Maria. I had avoided talking about Maria for 3 years. But sitting next to Elena, it didn't feel like tearing myself open anymore. I told her how Maria used to sit in the rocking chair reading, how she insisted on growing tomatoes even though the rabbits always got them, how she sang while she washed dishes. I told her about the night she died, the storm, the calf, the creek rising, the phone call that never got answered, and finding her scarf caught on the fence. Elena put her hand over mine. You didn't kill her, Connor. I gave a tired smile. People say that a lot. No, I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it's true. Bad people do bad things, but the ones left behind often punish themselves for them. The words stayed with me. I looked at Elena under the kitchen light. Her hair was tied back loosely, her hands had small cuts from fixing fence, and her face was tired but calm. The girl who had stood on my porch shaking in the rain was starting to stand on her own feet again. And I realized I didn't just want to protect her. I wanted to be near her. I wanted to hear her laugh in the yard. I wanted to see her standing at the stove making coffee. I wanted this place to have life in it again. Before I could say any of that, a small explosion sounded outside. We ran out together. The barn wasn't on fire, but smoke was coming from the electrical panel. Someone had deliberately tripped the main breaker outside. The lights in the pens went out. The security cameras lost signal. Elena stood beside me, face white. He wants you scared. I looked at the barn, then at the dark fields beyond it. No, he wants me angry enough to do something stupid. So what do? I turned to her. We gather real evidence, not just against the sabotage, against everything he's built. Elena took a deep breath. There's something that might help. She told me her mother had hidden a hard drive and a stack of documents in their old house in Oregon before she died. Her father had suspected Salazar was forging contracts, stealing land, and laundering money through the supply company. Her mother had made copies, but after the family lost everything, the house was repossessed and sold to a company connected to Salazar. Elena wasn't sure the files were still there, but she knew exactly where they had been hidden, under the floorboards in her father's old office. I asked, "Is the house guarded now?" "Probably cameras, maybe security, but nobody thinks I would ever go back." I looked at her. "Then we don't break in like some action movie. We do it the right way." I called Grace. She said if Elena still had any claim to disputed assets and there was a chance the house contained evidence of criminal activity, we could ask the state police or the county prosecutor to get involved. But to get their attention, we needed a clear report, proof of sabotage, the fake contract, camera footage, and the financial links. Elena stared at the papers on the table. For the first time, I saw something in her eyes besides fear. I saw fire. "So we build a file." I nodded. "We build a file." That night, we worked until almost morning. I gathered the camera clips, photos of cut fences, canceled orders, and messages from the feed store. Elena organized the fake contract, the land records, the Northline Holdings documents, and old emails her father had saved. When the sky started to lighten, she fell asleep at the table, head resting on her arm. I put a blanket over her shoulders. Looking at her sleeping among all the evidence we had gathered, I knew this was no longer just about a stranger who had knocked on my door in the rain. This was about land, power, truth, and people who had been forced to stay quiet for too long. And for the first time in 3 years, I wanted to win, not for revenge, for a future. After we sent the first batch of evidence to Grace, things moved faster than I expected. She forwarded everything to the county prosecutor's office. A couple of days later, I got a call from a state police investigator named Daniel Pierce. He sounded careful. He said he would look into it, but to open a full investigation, he needed stronger proof, especially that hard drive Elena had mentioned. We didn't have much time. Salazar already knew we were collecting things against him. 3 days later, he hit us where it hurt most. I woke up at 4 in the morning to the sound of cattle bellowing in panic. I ran outside and found the south gate wide open and the electric fence cut. The whole herd was scattered across the pasture that ran along the main road. One cow had a bad cut on her leg from getting tangled in wire. Someone had spray painted bright red letters across the barn door. Drop her off or lose everything. Elena came running out behind me. She stopped dead when she saw the words. Connor. I turned to her. Her face had gone completely white. Go back inside. No, I'm helping. Elena. She looked at me, eyes red but steady. I'm not going to hide in the house while he destroys your ranch. We worked in the dark and the cold. I called Mr. Coleman and he came over right away. Elena drove the old ATV, clumsy at first but determined, trying to keep the cattle from reaching the highway. I wrapped the injured cow's leg as best I could and called the vet. By the time the sun came up, we were all exhausted and covered in mud, but the herd was safe. Mr. Coleman stared at the painted message, jaw tight. Connor, this isn't just harassment anymore. You need to call the state police right now. I already had. Daniel Pierce arrived around noon. He took photos, collected paint samples, checked the cut wire, and downloaded the camera footage. One of the extra cameras I had mounted on the apple tree had caught a silver pickup leaving the ranch at 3:17 a.m. The license plate was half covered in mud, but you could clearly see the small logo of Salazar's transport company on the door. Daniel looked at me. This helps a lot. Elena asked, Is it enough to search my old house? He was quiet for a moment, then said, I'll push for the warrant today. Salazar didn't wait. That same afternoon he called me. I put the phone on speaker so Elena could hear. His voice was calm, almost pleasant. You should keep better control of Miss Mendoza. She's causing you a lot of trouble. I answered, You're the one destroying my ranch. He laughed softly. Be careful, Connor. False accusations are a serious matter. Elena stepped closer to the phone. Richard, this is almost over. There was a short silence on the other end. Elena, still think you matter that much? You're just the daughter of a failure. Her hands were shaking, but her voice didn't break. No, I'm the one who's still alive to tell people what you did. Salazar's tone dropped. If you think a few old papers can bring me down, you're as naive as your father. The call ended. Elena stood there trying to stay upright, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. I walked over and took her hands in mine. You okay? She looked up at me. It was the first time I had called her M without thinking about it. She noticed. So did I. The air between us changed. Elena spoke quietly. I'm scared, but I don't want to run anymore. I answered, Then don't run. I'm here. She studied my face for a long time. You've already lost too much because of me. No, I've gotten a lot back because of you. She shook her head gently. Don't say that unless you really mean it. I stepped closer. Elena, I don't know exactly when it happened. Maybe the night you stood on the porch in the rain? Maybe when you were chasing chickens in the mud? Maybe when you sat at this table trying to piece together evidence even though you could barely keep your eyes open, but I know I love you. She looked at me like I had just given her something she didn't think she deserved. Connor, you don't have to answer right now. I just needed you to know. What I'm doing isn't out of pity. It isn't because I feel responsible. I'm choosing you. Tears ran down her face. I love you too, she whispered. I tried not to. I thought I would only bring trouble to you. But every time you stood between me and the fear, I started believing I could have a different life. I pulled her into my arms. The first kiss wasn't perfect or cinematic. It happened in the old kitchen after a day of chasing cattle, my hands still scratched, her shirt covered in dried mud. But it was the most honest kiss I had ever had. It didn't erase Maria. It didn't erase everything Elena had been through. It just said that two damaged people could still choose to start again. That night, Daniel called. We have the warrant. Tomorrow morning, we're searching the old Mendoza house. Elena should come to show us where to look. I said, I'm going with her. Daniel replied, I figured she'd need you there. The next morning, we drove to Oregon with Daniel, Grace, and two investigators. The old house sat at the end of a tree-lined road, windows boarded up, yard overgrown. When Elena stood in front of it, she gripped my hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. I grew up here, she said, before everything was taken. I squeezed her hand back. Today we take some of it back. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Elena led us to her father's old office. Under a loose floorboard near the bookshelf, exactly where she remembered, was a small metal box. Inside were a hard drive, several copies of contracts, handwritten letters from her father, and a list of transactions between Salazar, Northline Holdings, local banks, and small ranches that had been forced to sell. Grace opened her laptop right there and started checking the drive. Her expression changed immediately. Oh my God, she said. This isn't just about Elena's family. This is an entire network of land theft. Daniel looked at the screen, then stepped outside to make a call. While everyone worked, Elena stood in the middle of the room, tears falling silently. I stayed beside her. Your father didn't die for nothing, I said. She turned to me. And your mother hid exactly what needed to be hidden. That afternoon, Salazar was summoned. Instead of waiting, he tried to hold a small press conference in town claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign, that Elena was unstable after her father's death, and that I was a poor farmer she had manipulated. But Daniel and the prosecutor moved faster. Warrants expanded. Accounts were frozen. Former employees started coming forward. One driver admitted he had been paid to cut fences and release cattle on my ranch. An accountant provided emails proving Salazar knew the wife contract was fake from the beginning. By evening, news spread that Richard Salazar had been arrested. I was standing in front of the cattle pen with Elena when the call came. The wind moved across the dry pasture, carrying the smell of earth after rain. Elena looked at me, voice unsteady. Is it over? I answered. Not completely. There will still be investigations, court dates, a lot of tiring work, but he doesn't get to stand over you anymore. She leaned into me. I don't know what to do when I'm not running. I looked at the ranch. The fences still half repaired, the barn still smelling of smoke, the fields waiting for spring. Then we learned how to stay. The investigation took many months. Salazar wasn't just charged with forging the contract and threatening Elena. He was also tied to multiple cases of forced land sales, property damage, loan fraud, and money laundering through his supply company and trucking business. Once the first farmers heard he had been arrested, others started coming forward. Men who had lost barns to fires, men whose water had been cut off, men whose banks had suddenly called in loans after their paperwork was quietly altered. It turned out my ranch had never been his only target. I was simply one of the smaller ones he thought he could crush without much noise. This time he was wrong, Elena testified in court. I sat behind her and watched the woman who had once stood shaking on my porch in the rain stand straight in front of the judge and tell her story clearly, one sentence at a time. She spoke about her father, the fake documents, the night she ran to my ranch, and everything that happened afterward. Salazar's lawyer tried to rattle her. He asked if she had feelings for me and was making up stories for her own benefit. Elena looked straight at him and answered without hesitation. I do love Connor Walker, but my love for him did not create a forged signature. It did not cut fences or poison water pumps or set up shell companies to steal my family's land. Those things were done by your client. The courtroom went quiet. I had to lower my head so no one would see me smiling. In the end, Salazar was convicted. His assets were frozen to pay back the people he had harmed. A portion of Elena's family land was returned to her. She could have sold it, kept it, or started over in the place where her parents had once lived. For several days, I didn't bring it up. I didn't want her to feel like she owed me or the ranch anything. One afternoon in early spring, Elena found me in the barn. I was repairing the cattle pen door that had been damaged months earlier. She leaned against the doorframe holding a folder of papers. "I've made a decision about the land," she said. I put the hammer down. "Okay." She walked closer. "I'm keeping a small piece where my mother is buried. The rest I want to put into a community fund to help other small ranches that Salazar hurt. Grace says we can set up a legal and financial program to support them against dirty contracts." I looked at her. I wasn't surprised. Elena had never been the kind of person who wanted power, so she could become another version of Salazar. She wanted to turn what had been taken from her into something that protected other people. "And you?" I asked. "Where do you want to live?" She looked around the old barn, the fields, the cattle pens, the dirt road, and the truck parked near the fence. "Here." I stayed quiet. She continued. "Not because I have nowhere else to go, not because I need you to protect me. This time I have a choice, and I'm choosing to stay." I walked over to her. "Elena, are you sure? This ranch isn't rich. Winters are hard. The tractor breaks down. I still have debt. There will be days when you hate the mud and the smell and waking up before the sun." She smiled. "I've already hated those things, and I still love this place." "Why?" She looked at me. "Because this is the first place in a very long time where I wasn't treated like a debt or a product or a burden. Here I learned how to work, how to laugh, how to get angry, and how not to run. And you're here." For a few seconds I couldn't speak. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and took out a small box. It wasn't a big diamond, just a simple silver band I had bought with money from selling the first calves of the season and from fixing tractors for neighbors. I said, "The first night you came here, you told me someone had sent you to be my wife." I hated that sentence because it turned you into something other people had the right to arrange. So today I want to ask properly. I got down on one knee on the barn floor that still smelled of wood and dry grass. "Elena Mendoza, will you marry me? Not because of any contract, not because of fear, not because you have no other road left, but because you choose me, and I choose you." Elena started crying, but this time the tears looked like relief. "Yes," she said, "I choose you." Our wedding happened on the ranch in early summer. It was simple. No fancy hotel, no expensive dress. Neighbors set up long tables in the yard. Mr. Coleman hung string lights around the barn. Grace performed the ceremony. Daniel Pierce came too, bringing a cheap bottle of wine and saying it was the calmest wedding he had attended after such a noisy case. Several farmers who had also been hurt by Salazar brought food, wildflowers, and homemade bread. They didn't come just to celebrate. They came to see that the fear Salazar had spread across the county had finally been broken. Elena wore a simple white dress. Her hair was loose with a few small flowers tucked in. When she walked across the yard between the sound of the wind and the distant lowing of cattle, I suddenly remembered the first rainy night. She had stood at my door soaking wet and shaking, saying someone had sent her. Now she was walking toward me on her own 2 feet. In my vows, I said, "I used to think my heart had been buried with the past. But you came not to replace anyone, but to remind me that people who are still alive still need to live. I promise I will never see you as someone I saved. You are not someone I rescued. You are the person who pulled me out of that quiet house and taught me how to hope again." Elena held my hands, her voice steady, even though it shook a little. "I had my home, my name, my safety, and even the right to decide my own life taken from me by other people. But you gave me something no one can force on another person, a real choice. Today I choose you. I choose this ranch. I choose mornings full of mud, fences that need fixing, hard winters, and summers that smell like cut hay. I choose to stay, not because I have to, but because this is home." After the wedding, life didn't suddenly become easy. The ranch still needed repairs, debt still needed paying. There were mornings the tractor wouldn't start and afternoons when rain ruined the hay. But the house felt different. On the whiteboard by the fridge, there was still a list of things to do, but now there were also notes Elena wrote. Buy tomato seeds. Call Grace about the farmer's fund. Remind Connor to rest before he breaks his back. A year later, the ranch was slowly coming back to life. We opened a small weekend stand selling eggs, goat milk, garden vegetables, and bread that Elena had taught herself to make. She also built a simple website for the ranch and took orders from town, but she never let modern life turn the place into something fake or shiny. It was still us, the land, the wind, the cattle pens, cold mornings, and the smell of coffee in the kitchen. One afternoon after work, Elena sat on the new rocking chair I had built for her and placed on the porch. She looked out across the fields. I leaned against the railing, watching the sun drop behind the hills. She said, "Do you still remember the night I arrived?" "I remember. Back then I thought my life was finished." I looked at her. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think it's only just beginning." I sat down beside her. The wind carried the smell of fresh cut hay across the yard. In the pens, the cattle were calm. Far away, the east fence, the one that had been cut so many times, was standing stronger than before. I said, "I used to think this ranch was a place that held on to everything I had lost." Elena rested her head against my shoulder. "And now?" I looked at the house with the lights on behind us, then at her hand resting in mine. "Now it's the place that holds everything we chose."